In the heart of a bustling city, tucked between towering office buildings and cafes buzzing with life, stood a large school that served as the center of the community. The school had a vibrant facade, painted in cheerful colors that hardly hinted at the darkness lurking within its walls on some days. This place was filled with laughter and learning during school hours. But at night, it took on a quiet, eerie aura. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the playground, the school transformed. The laughter of children faded away, leaving only the rustling of leaves and the occasional chirp of crickets. Underneath the flickering streetlights, the janitor began his nightly routine, armed with a mop and cleaning supplies rather than a weapon. His name was Frank, a single dad working hard to provide for his 2 children while juggling late-night shifts. His job was vital, not just for keeping the school clean, but also for ensuring that everything was in order for the next day's classes. Frank moved through the empty hallways, his footsteps echoing against the polished floors. This silence felt familiar yet unsettling. He would often think about how important it was to maintain a safe and clean environment for the students. Each night, he meticulously checked every classroom and restroom, ensuring that no piece of trash was left behind. Despite the weariness that weighed on him from long hours at work, he took pride in his role as a caretaker of this space, feeling that every little bit helped shape a bright future for the kids who sought knowledge within these walls. On this particular night, light from the waning moon created an almost cinematic effect as it illuminated the floors and walls. The custodial closet was stocked with all sorts of supplies needed for cleaning. Brooms, disinfectants, and mops lined up neatly. A faint smell of lemon-scented cleaner filled the air, mingling with the musty scent of old textbooks and pencils forgotten in lost corners of classrooms. It was a routine that Frank found both comforting and grounding amidst his busy life. Yet, there was something different about this evening. The atmosphere felt charged, as if it held its breath in anticipation. The school's security guard, Mark, had recently started patrolling more frequently at night. Though he had always been a presence in the building during school hours, he now seemed particularly vigilant, perhaps due to recent reports of thefts around the neighborhood. While Frank respected Mark's desire to keep everyone safe, it often felt like an unwelcome shadow looming over his already solitary job. At times, their paths crossed in the dimly lit corridors, where they would exchange polite nods or brief conversations about their respective days. Mark was tough and serious. He wore his badge as if it were a part of him. Frank understood that Mark's job required him to be on high alert, but sometimes it felt like he was overreacting. There had never been any trouble at the school while Frank had been on watch. That night, as Frank mopped up spills left by careless students or wayward water bottles, he couldn't shake off an odd feeling gnawing at him. It wasn't just about Mark's watchful gaze, but rather something deeper that sparked within him. A sense of unease that made him feel like a stranger in a place he had callously come to consider home. As he continued his work under the ominous glow of the hallway lamps, thoughts raced through his mind. Could this be one of those nights when shadows masked true threats? He brushed it aside at first, focusing instead on his tasks. However, as he worked alone in near silence, paranoia began to creep in. The hum of fluorescent lights overhead broke the stillness occasionally and added to an unsettling ambiance. Each sound made Frank jump. His heart pounded loudly in contrast to the stillness around him. He felt eyes on him despite the emptiness surrounding him, and found himself glancing over his shoulder more often than usual. What Frank didn't know was that Mark was watching him too, but not with the intent to protect. As tension hung in the air like an invisible thread woven with uncertainty and doubt, fate prepared to intertwine their worlds in ways neither expected. This location held stories within its walls, tales of laughter and learning mixed with moments of loneliness and unease. Little did they know that tonight would add another chapter to its lore, a moment that would change everything for both men forever. Frank was not just a janitor. He was a devoted single dad trying to provide a better life for his two children, Ella and Jake. Every evening after dropping them off at their grandmother's house, he would prepare for another long night. His daily routine consisted of juggling school drop-offs, part-time jobs, and the duties of parenting, all while hoping to set a good example for his kids. His day began early as he rushed to make breakfast and pack lunches. Frank was known for his scrambled eggs and toast, which Ella and Jake happily devoured. They often teased him about his inability to make pancakes without burning them. But it became a playful routine that brought laughter even in the morning chaos. After seeing them off with hugs and "I love yous," Frank would take a moment to glance at the family pictures on the fridge, a constant reminder of why he worked so hard. Once at the school in the evening, Frank transformed from dad to caretaker. He donned his blue jumpsuit, which had seen better days, but felt comfortable against his skin. It was a badge of honor in its own way. Each stain or frayed thread told stories of spills cleaned up and messes contained, all part of making the school safe and welcoming for students. Frank approached his job with determination. He would gather his supplies, mop, broom, and cleaning agents, and roam through the empty halls like a guardian spirit watching over the place, where so many dreams were nurtured during daylight hours. Each classroom was another small kingdom he meticulously managed during those quiet nights. He checked every nook and cranny, ensuring that desks were tidy and trash cans emptied, feeling fulfilled as he transformed disorder into order. But there was more to Frank than just being a janitor or a father. He had dreams too. Once upon a time, before life's challenges took precedence, he had aspired to study teaching. Helping students learn had always excited him, but financial struggles forced him to prioritize work over education. In whispers at night when everything was quiet, he'd sometimes think about returning to school one day. For now, though, the reality of earning enough money to give Ella and Jake what they needed kept him focused on immediate priorities. On those slow nights spent mopping floors under dim lights, he often thought about how proud he felt watching Ella ace her spelling tests or Jake draw intricate pictures of their family adventures together. Moments that made all his hard work feel worthwhile. In contrast stood Mark, the school's security guard, whose presence seemed imposing within the walls they both occupied, yet filled with different intentions. Mark had worn that uniform for years. Its dark fabric blended with shadows as he patrolled each corner of the building like a lion guarding its territory. He took pride in protecting faculty and students alike, but also often found himself worried about threats much larger than mere mischief-making teenagers. Mark's background was not nearly as cheerful as Frank's. Drawn by past experiences that left him scarred both physically and emotionally, he'd sworn himself into law enforcement after experiencing violence firsthand in his youth. The voice within him pushed him toward ensuring safety wherever possible, even if it meant being overly vigilant at times. Some might call Mark brusque or even rude. However, deep down lay a man motivated by fear of failing those under his watchful eye. Every time sirens echoed nearby or rumors floated around about thefts in their neighborhood, Mark felt an unshakable urge rise within him, a need to protect not only those present, but also himself from potential harm. This duality made their interactions tense whenever paths crossed. While Frank sought solace in understanding that they both wanted safety for students, two men with common goals, their approaches differed greatly. One looking through hopeful eyes, while another remained cautious, like an ever-watchful hawk surveying its surroundings for signs of danger. Yet beneath this tension lingered threads connecting their lives. Struggles birthed from unyielding fears against hopes draped in dreams gone dormant. From life's relentless grind pushed them inadvertently closer together than either could have ever imagined. Even if just walking through empty corridors under unforgiving fluorescent lights should have been easier. As darkness settled around them, a prelude painting a vivid backdrop where destinies awaited collision, their stories began intertwining dangerously close. Unbeknownst to them, neither man truly understood how fleeting moments could shift everyday normalcy into situations unlike anything experienced before, where fleeting glances could become charged encounters leading down paths neither dared expect. As the weeks went by, the tension between Frank and Mark steadily increased. What began as simple encounters during their nightly routines morphed into a simmering unease that neither man fully understood. Each shift carried an air of uncertainty, and every small interaction hinted at deeper issues brewing beneath the surface. Frank often found himself in the same corridor at the same time as Mark while working, an occurrence that used to feel routine but now held a sense of foreboding. With Mark patrolling with an unyielding presence, Frank felt the weight of his watchful gaze, making him hyper-aware of every creak of the floorboards beneath his feet. He couldn't shake the feeling that Mark perceived him as a potential threat rather than just a dedicated worker. One night, as Frank was cleaning up a spill in the cafeteria, he heard footsteps approaching hurriedly. He turned to see Mark rounding the corner, eyes narrowed in determination. At that moment, Frank had simply been mopping up juice spilled by careless students. He raised his hands to show he meant no harm, but Mark only tightened his grip on his flashlight, which he carried like a weapon. "Everything all right here?" Mark asked curtly, his tone harsh with suspicion. Frank responded with a smile, hoping to ease the tension. "Just cleaning up after some kids," he replied lightly. "Nothing to worry about." But Mark's skepticism remained. "Just doing my job," he snapped back before continuing down the hall, leaving behind a lingering chill in the air. The exchange troubled Frank. It felt as though Mark had seen him not as a colleague, but as a potential intruder or criminal hiding behind janitorial duties. Although they shared a goal of ensuring the school's safety, Frank felt that Mark's past influenced his judgment of anyone who wandered through those halls at night. The misunderstandings mounted over time. During another encounter soon after, Frank overheard Mark speaking with another staff member in the break room. They were discussing recent thefts in the area. Mark advocated for more vigilant police patrols and stricter measures to secure the building at night. "We can't trust anyone anymore," he declared adamantly. "You never know when someone will try to take advantage." While this conversation did not directly involve Frank, it pierced him deeply. His heart sank as he realized that even if Mark questioned his intentions publicly, he had already started to form an impression of him, one that lacked trust. Frank tried to brush off these feelings by focusing on his work and reminding himself that he was simply doing his job to support Ella and Jake. But doubt crept in each time he noticed Mark's scrutinizing gaze fall upon him during their late shifts. He could feel the guard lingering near doorways, sometimes just staring from afar, while he cleaned up crates stacked in corners or wiped whiteboards clear of chalk. Then there was an incident one particularly warm night, when tensions finally hit their peak. The school had recently hosted a large event where several supplies were scattered about, a normal part of cleanup duty for Frank. But by that point in the evening, exhaustion weighed heavy on him. As he moved through locker rooms, focusing hard on organizing equipment, He let out a minor sigh from frustration at how much there was still left to do. At that moment, Mark entered unexpectedly from another direction and caught sight of Frank's exhausted state. It must have looked suspicious under the glaring overhead lights, despite being completely innocent. To Mark, who branded everything through the lens of protection based on his tumultuous past, it became another cause for alarm. "What are you doing back here?" Mark barked out without introduction. "Just tidying up," Frank replied feebly as a wave of anxiety surged through him. "You don't have permission to be here alone," Mark insisted rigidly, stepping closer, asserting dominance over the hallway space between them, a territory one man claimed while questioning another's presence therein. "I'm allowed to clean after events," Frank shot back defensively, confusion riddling his face. At that moment, neither man knew that their miscommunication would lead to something more serious than either could have anticipated. Fear on one side met defensiveness on another, without an attempt at understanding where both came from. In those moments leading up to their confrontation, what remained clear was rooted in each man's experiences. Frank longing for acceptance and peace amidst struggle, while Mark wrestled with fears and phantoms gripping tighter each day. Unbeknownst to them both was the impending clash waiting just around the corner, an event that would turn their simple misunderstandings into a life-altering moment they couldn't escape from anymore. The atmosphere that night felt heavier than usual, thick with tension and uncertainty. Frank had been cleaning up the aftermath of an event, the echo of his mop sloshing against the floor reverberating through the empty corridors. Each stroke of the mop was accompanied by the faint sound of his heartbeat, drumming louder as he sensed Mark's presence nearby. Frank was exhausted, his body weary from long hours, but he just wanted to finish his shift and return to his children. As he moved into a dimly lit hallway near the locker rooms, he took a moment to wipe the sweat from his brow. The fluorescent lights flickered above him, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls. Just as he began to gather himself for another push towards finishing his task, Mark appeared through the shadows like a looming figure. "What are you doing back here?" Mark's voice cut through the stillness, sharp and demanding. His posture was rigid, muscles tense as if wound tight with pressure. "Just tidying up," Frank replied, a hint of defensiveness creeping into his tone. He could feel apprehension rising in his chest, a knot forming in his stomach at the sight of Mark's aggressive stance. "There's so much left from the event tonight. I have permission to be here." Mark did not respond immediately. Instead, he stepped forward with a calculated authority, his eyes narrowing as he scrutinized Frank from head to toe. In that moment, Frank felt exposed and vulnerable under Mark's gaze. The air felt electric between them, crackling with unspoken words and brewing conflict. "I don't care what permission you have. You shouldn't be in here alone." Mark's voice had taken on a harsher edge. His words dripped with the weight of suspicion. Frank took a small step back, raising his hands in a gesture meant to signify peace. "I'm just doing my job, Mark. I'm not a threat." But Mark's grip on his flashlight tightened, as if it were preparing for something more sinister. The tension escalated rapidly. Frank's heart began pounding in rhythm with the building dread that clawed at his mind. "Step away from there," Mark commanded suddenly, pointing toward a nearby storage closet filled with supplies. His authoritative tone made it clear this was not a suggestion. It was an order. Confusion surged through Frank, a mix of fear and anger ignited within him. "You're overreacting. I'm just cleaning," he shot back angrily while still trying to maintain calm. In that pivotal moment, everything changed. With a swift motion, Mark reached for his holster, pulling out his gun without hesitation. The metallic glint of the weapon caught Frank off guard, freezing him in place as fear coursed through his veins like ice water. "Don't move," Mark shouted fiercely, lifting the gun and aiming it squarely at Frank's chest. Time seemed to slow down as shock washed over Frank's face. An expression of disbelief painted across him, while adrenaline surged through every inch of his body. "Mark, please put that down," he pleaded desperately, wide-eyed and trembling. Panic settled like a weight on Frank's shoulders. He could hardly breathe as he thought about his children waiting at home for their dad. This was not how he envisioned this night ending. Mark's eyes were filled with uncertainty and fear. Fear rooted deep within due to past experiences that had shaped him into this protective figure now, wielding a dangerous tool of authority. "I can't trust you," he barked back, voice trembling slightly under pressure. The intensity of the moment pierced through both men. Frank felt raw panic clawing at him, while Mark wrestled with the conflicting emotions of duty versus fear. Each man stood entrenched in their own spirals of suspicion and frustration, unable to bridge the chasm between them. Then came the sound that would forever alter their lives. A loud crash echoed behind them as supplies from the storage closet toppled over due to an awkward shift in weight caused by Frank stepping back instinctively in fear. The noise broke through their standoff. Instinct kicked in abruptly as both men reacted simultaneously. Mark jerked the gun towards the noise, while Frank instinctively flinched away. In those breathtaking seconds that followed, the moment stretched endlessly. Frank found himself falling backward, unceremoniously landing on the floor as confusion swept over him. All it took was 3 fleeting seconds for everything to spiral out of control. Disarmed and disoriented on the ground, Frank stared up at Mark, who stood there wide-eyed, weapons still drawn. Each man bewildered by how quickly their lives shifted from mundane routines to this terrifying confrontation that neither had anticipated nor wanted. A silence fell between them, like an unyielding barrier filled only by their racing hearts. A stark realization dawning that they were now irrevocably changed by this fateful encounter. The air in the hallway hung thick with tension, electricity crackling, as Mark held his gun trained on Frank, who lay on the ground in shock. Just moments before, everything had seemed routine. It was just Frank, diligently cleaning after a school event, laboring through the quiet night in familiar surroundings. Now, however, that comforting familiarity had shattered into chaos within mere seconds. In an instant, as Mark barked orders to step away from the supplies, the dynamic shifted dramatically. Frank's body reacted instinctively to defend himself. He raised his hands and took a small step backward, a gesture meant to indicate he was no threat at all. However, to Mark's eyes, this movement appeared to be an act of aggression or an attempt to flee. Within those brief heartbeats of hesitation, everything happened in rapid succession. Mark had been trained to react swiftly to perceived danger, a habit honed over years of watching for threats. So when Frank moved even slightly away from the storage closet, Mark's mind races with fear and distrust. "Step away," he shouted again, voice vibrating with authority that echoed off the walls. Frank felt a swell of confusion and frustration, mixed with fear. "I'm not doing anything wrong, just cleaning," he pleaded, his voice shaking as he struggled to keep calm amidst the storm of emotions swirling around him. That single utterance, "just cleaning," triggered something deep in Mark. Years of wrestling with his responsibilities and fears told him that he couldn't take chances. He had seen too many situations spiral into disaster too quickly. Time dragged on, as if in slow motion. Every heartbeat resounded loudly in his ears as he processed Frank's response. In a split-second decision, fueled by misplaced trust and fear, Mark reached for his holster, pulling out his gun with a movement that felt both fluid and desperate. The metallic glint reflected the harsh light above them as it swung into view, an image so stark and jarring against the backdrop of the school's once safe environment. "Don't move," Mark commanded fiercely as his finger hovered near the trigger. His eyes darted between Frank's wide expression of disbelief and the weapon in his own hand. It was a volatile mix of authority and fear, a primal reaction to what Mark believed was an escalating threat. The sudden shock of seeing a gun aimed at him sent a jolt through Frank's body, convincing him that this could not be happening. "Mark, please put that down," he begged, panic rising like bile in his throat. Every rational thought fled. He was a janitor, not a criminal. How could things come to this? In those critical moments that followed, both men found themselves trapped in their spirals of emotion. Frank pleading for his life, while Mark waged an internal battle against years of ingrained fear combined with his sense of duty. But neither man would fully comprehend how their versions of reality clashed so violently at that moment. Then came a sound that would irrevocably alter the course of their lives. A loud crash erupted behind them as equipment toppled over from a nearby closet that had been knocked askew during Frank's nervous retreat. The loud clatter shattered the standoff like glass hitting concrete, jolting both men into reaction mode. Instinctively, Mark turned toward the noise while still gripping the firearm tightly. In that instant, overwhelmed by adrenaline and fear, Frank flinched back further, his body urging him to escape from a danger he couldn't bear to confront head-on, while mentally screaming at himself to stay calm. In those fleeting seconds, the world collapsed into chaos. Frank lost his balance entirely and fell backward onto the cold floor. His hands braced against the ground instinctively, positioning him far more vulnerable than before in contrast to Mark's authoritative stature above him. With startled eyes still locked on each other's faces, the apprehension lay thick between them like fog choking every chance for understanding. Mark blinked rapidly. Confusion coursed through him alongside lingering adrenaline as he saw Frank sprawled out helplessly before him. What had gone from routine maintaining of school corridors twisted into something infinitely darker. In one sweeping moment defined by miscommunication and fear-fueled reflexes, everything they shared turned upside down. There they were, two men who never intended for confrontation, forever altered by misunderstandings, folded into an unfolding narrative they could never have imagined before this night began. As silence enveloped them, once more like a suffocating blanket amidst racing hearts, the heaviness of realization pillared over both men. This moment would mark an indelible change in their lives moving forward, a collision whose consequences played out beyond comprehension. The hallway fell eerily silent after Frank tumbled to the floor, a stillness broken only by the sound of their racing hearts. For a moment, it felt as if time had stopped, both men caught in the aftermath of the chaotic confrontation. Mark stood frozen, gun trained on Frank, who lay vulnerable and confused. The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Neither man dared to move. Then came the sounds of footsteps approaching rapidly from outside. Other staff members who had heard the commotion began to appear, drawn by the noise of the toppled supplies and the strange silence that followed. They peered into the dimly lit corridor, eyes widening in disbelief at the sight unfolding before them. Mark standing with his gun drawn and Frank sprawled on the floor. "What's going on?" one of the teachers called out hesitantly, glancing nervously between the two men. Confusion washed over their faces as they processed the scene. This wasn't just an ordinary night at school. Mark's heart raced as he turned his attention to the teachers. "Stay back," he barked, his voice echoing with authority, though it trembled slightly under the weight of his own uncertainty. He searched their faces for understanding, but found only shock and fear reflected back at him. As if sensing an invisible thread pulling tighter, panic began to spread amongst those gathered. Whispers started to ripple through the crowd. Questions about whether they needed to call for help, what had happened leading up to this dramatic standoff. Each second stretched painfully long, and Mark's grip on his weapon tightened reflexively as he struggled to process what had just transpired. This was not how any of them envisioned a typical night at school would unfold. Frank slowly raised his hands again, palms outward. A plea for peace amid unfolding chaos. "I'm not a threat," he murmured weakly, voice catching in his throat. "Please, just help me." The sight of Frank's fear pierced through Mark's hardened exterior. A small part of him recognized that this was not who he wanted to be. The man who held another's life in his hands based on misunderstandings and misjudgments. But fear still pulsed through him like a live wire. It was easier to hold on to that fear than it was to confront it. Just then, sirens wailed in the distance, an unmistakable sound that drew closer with every passing moment. The arrival of law enforcement transformed the atmosphere entirely. It was no longer just about Mark and Frank, but about control and accountability as well. Officers pulled up outside, blue lights flashing against the school's walls, illuminating its colorful exterior, now tinged with urgency. "Put down your weapon," an officer shouted firmly as they entered through the main doors, eyes scanning for potential threats. There was no hesitation in their movements. Training kicked in as they assessed the scene before them. Mark felt his pulse race even faster. His mind spun with thoughts of what could happen next. Would they believe him? Would they see him as a protector or just a man who'd brandished a weapon without cause? He slowly lowered his gun, but did not holster it yet. The tension remained thick. "Step away from him," another officer commanded sharply, pointing toward Frank on the ground while assessing Mark's position carefully. There was no room for mistakes now. Each decision carried heavy consequences. "Wait, he's not armed." One of the teachers intervened quickly, raising her hands as if trying to defuse an explosive situation. "He's just the janitor." The officers exchanged glances, processing her words while maintaining focus on Mark's movements. "Get on your knees, hands behind your head," they ordered Mark with unwavering authority. Struggling to keep calm amid mounting stress, Mark complied reluctantly, lowering himself onto his knees while keeping his eyes fixed on Frank, the man he had instinctively perceived as a threat mere moments earlier. Regret flooded through him like icy water. How had everything spiraled so far out of control? Meanwhile, Frank remained seated on the floor, breathless and shocked, as he tried to make sense of what had unfolded. The intensity swirled around him like fog, unreal yet crushingly real all at once. He longed for answers but felt too bewildered to ask any questions. Instead, he focused on taking deep breaths to steady himself amidst chaos. As officers moved toward Frank cautiously next, checking him for injuries and ensuring he posed no danger after all that transpired. Relief washed over him when he realized they didn't view him as a criminal, but rather as an innocent caught in an unexpected storm. A man whose intentions were simply rooted in care for others. However bleak the situation seemed at first glance, the aftermath revealed more than just reactions from frightened staff members or law enforcement. It laid bare fragile connections forged through misunderstanding and fear amid darkened hallways where safety should have reigned supreme. What followed would not only redefine their individual lives, but also cast ripples throughout their community. A stark reminder that assumptions could lead down paths littered with consequences none could foresee during those terrifying moments. Mark's reaction that fateful night stemmed from deep-rooted insecurities and a past shaped by troubling experiences that left scars on his psyche. As a security guard, his responsibility to protect often weighed heavily on him. He had endured incidents in the past that haunted his mind, instances where his failures to act promptly had led to consequences that still haunted him. A burglary at a previous assignment, where he had failed to catch the perpetrator, lingered in his memory like a ghost. That night, the anxiety that gripped him was not merely about this new confrontation. It was the culmination of years spent feeling inadequate in his role. When Mark stepped into the shadows of the school, he positioned himself as a guardian. However, this persona masked his vulnerabilities. He feared looking weak, even appearing hesitant could undermine his authority in front of others. The recent wave of thefts in the area heightened his anxieties, driving him further down the path of paranoia. Every noise felt amplified, every movement from those in the halls became suspect. This state of alertness morphed into a hyper-focus on potential threats, where each unexpected encounter ignited an overactive imagination fueled by insecurity. In Mark's mind, he had trained to recognize signs of danger all too well. The narrow stances, defensive postures, and anxious glances could easily be interpreted as provocation or intent to harm. So when Frank raised his hands instinctively to calm the situation, Mark read it as a challenge rather than a plea for peace. In that moment, confusion clouded judgment, thrusting them both into a downward spiral of miscommunication fueled by fear. Additionally, Mark's view of Frank as an outsider added more weight to the decision he made that night. Unbeknownst to him, Mark was also grappling with biases that came from merely seeing Frank as someone whose presence challenged the status quo. A janitor working lonely shifts while earning barely enough to support his family. A thread of social class stigma crept into Mark's thought process. Perhaps he didn't see Frank as someone striving for survival like many others during vulnerable nighttime hours, but rather as a potential threat lurking in familiar territory. Then there were reminders from the past. Fellow officers who had warned him after troubling confrontations where judgment was questioned and misread signals led to improper actions being taken. Each lesson driven home left imprints inside him, like a weight attached to each decision he made going forward. Fear built upon itself, like layers of old paint obscuring what lay beneath. He wasn't just protecting others. He was also protecting himself from being judged or categorized as someone inadequate. Uncertainty radiated within Mark's stance when confronted with Frank. Here stood a man merely doing his job, yet painted as a potential assailant due to years of mental conditioning instilled through experience. While Frank raised his hands in surrender, Mark's instincts screamed at him to stay alert, heightening each heartbeat until it overwhelmed rational thought entirely. However misleading these interpretations may have been, the tension present that night symbolized much deeper currents intertwining between their lives, rooted in profound misunderstanding and misplaced fears. Mark was not just defending himself against Frank, but against his own insecurities fueled by past encounters laden with consequences never desired. All these elements converged rapidly, each moment fizzled with static energy. To culminate in this misunderstanding born from protective instincts turned dangerously uncontrolled. In some eerily telling fashion, it illustrated precisely how human emotions could shape reactions, evaporating clarity and wisdom like morning fog under bright sunlight. The aftermath would resonate far beyond mere templates, serving as cautionary tales for both individuals involved. One seeing their urban world stripped bare amid layers crafted from both their histories, intertwined uniquely, while hurting deeply. though not without hope for understanding thereafter. Frank would never appear simply as the janitor again within these hallowed halls, nor would Mark embody only the security guard. His entity forever encapsulated, entwined by perceptions, wrestling fiercely against instinctual triggers, chasing shadows, lurking long past desire. Examining these layers, unwrapped stories, hidden deep within layers of life, promising both turmoil yet sparking potential paths toward healing. Once true acknowledgement entered conscious awareness, navigating challenges exemplified through raw human experience, evolving thereafter. Hidden corners too often overlooked, until illuminated brightly amidst trials and tribulations faced head-on. As Frank lay on the cold floor, staring up at the fluorescent lights that flickered above, a whirlwind of emotions swirled within him. Confusion mingled with fear, creating a heavy knot in his stomach that felt like lead. He had never expected a night of cleaning and caring for the school to turn into a life-threatening encounter. The image of Mark standing over him, gun drawn, would forever be etched in his mind. In those frantic moments, Frank's thoughts turned to his children, Ella and Jake. They were the reason he worked these long hours. Every sweep of the mop and every spill he cleaned was done with the hope of providing a better life for them. He imagined their faces, full of innocence and trust. The thought of not returning home to them, of leaving them without their dad, sent shivers down his spine. What would they think if they knew their father was in such a perilous situation? Would they understand why he didn't come home that night? The instinct to protect his family surged through him like an electric shock. Frank had always viewed himself as their guardian, someone who shielded them from harm and uncertainty. Yet here he was, stripped of his dignity and safety. He felt more vulnerable than ever, lying on the ground while someone else held the power to decide his fate. Would Mark recognize that he posed no real threat? Or would that moment remain tainted by fear and suspicion? As the chaos unfolded around him, Frank grappled with feelings of betrayal and helplessness. He had always respected authority figures and considered himself a decent member of the community, contributing to the safety and cleanliness of the school where his children learned. The very person tasked with ensuring security now saw him as an enemy. How could this happen? Mark's earlier words echoed in his mind. You shouldn't be here alone. In that moment, Frank realized how easily misunderstandings could spiral out of control, leading one person to see another through a distorted lens shaped by biases and past experiences. He wanted to shout back that he was just doing his job, that he was there to help facilitate a safe environment for students and staff alike. But as he lay there with Mark's gun still aimed at him, he recognized that explanation would not matter in the heat of the moment. All that mattered was survival, but not just for himself. He needed to survive for Ella and Jake. They relied on him to be there, to take care of them both physically and emotionally. Would they grow up without a father because of this misunderstanding? The prospect terrified him. When the teachers entered, shocked by the scene unfolding before them, Frank felt a glimmer of hope. Their presence reassured him. Perhaps they could see the truth in the situation, that he was not what Mark perceived him to be. As they called out questions, confusion painted across their faces, Frank wanted to convey his innocence, but struggled against the weight of fear. Please, just help me, he managed to whisper, vulnerability lacing his voice as it caught in his throat. The arrival of law enforcement only heightened the tension further. Sirens blared outside, and blue lights cast flickering shadows across the walls while officers entered with authority ringing in their commands. The chaos shifted again as Frank watched Mark comply with orders. Going down on his knees, while keeping an eye on him, In that moment, Frank felt a mix of relief and frustration as law enforcement began checking him for injuries. They did not see him as a criminal, but as an innocent caught in circumstances beyond his control. A comforting realization arising amidst this turmoil. Yet even in relief, doubt gnawed at Frank's mind like a persistent itch. He feared how quickly assumptions could turn into actions that would change lives forever. This experience marked a stark lesson about safety, not just for himself, but for everyone involved. Safety was about more than just physical security. It also meant understanding one another's motives, confronting biases head-on, and fostering open lines of communication. As Frank glanced at Mark kneeling nearby, once so authoritative, but now stripped bare of composure, he wondered if this incident could pave the way for healing rather than division. Could they learn from this shared ordeal? Start conversations around perceptions and misinterpretations that often lingered in the shadows? It was unclear how the aftermath would unfold or how this incident would redefine their lives moving forward. What remained vivid was the urgency to protect what mattered most. Family and community bonds tested yet hopeful for reconciliation amid tumultuous circumstances. In the wake of the incident at the school, the community reacted with a mix of shock, support, and concern. Friends and family members of both Frank and Mark began to gather, drawn together by the turmoil that had rippled through their tight-knit environment. Word spread quickly. This was not just a confrontation between two men. It had implications for everyone involved. Frank's neighbors, who knew him as a dedicated father and hard worker, felt a wave of disbelief when they learned what had transpired. They immediately rallied around his family, offering comfort to Ella and Jake while ensuring that they felt safe in their home. Many parents from the neighborhood reached out to Frank's children directly, reinforcing messages of support and love during what could have been a confusing and frightening time. "Your dad did nothing wrong," one neighbor assured Ella as she held her hand tightly. "He's a hero for keeping our school clean and safe." The presence of supportive friends helped to create an atmosphere filled with resilience, even under such dire circumstances. People organized meal trains to bring food to Frank's house, while he remained shaken from the ordeal. They knew he needed time to recover mentally and emotionally after such an intense experience. At the same time, some in the community expressed concerns about Mark's actions as the security guard. Discussions erupted during parent-teacher meetings about safety protocols within schools and how individuals in positions of authority handle misunderstandings with civilians. A petition was started by concerned parents demanding more training for security personnel on managing confrontations without resorting to weapons. The goal was clear: to prevent any similar incidents from occurring in the future. "Everyone has a right to feel safe," voiced one parent at a community gathering. "We need guards who can de-escalate situations without fear taking over." As conversations unfolded among those close to both men, it became evident that many shared experiences shaped their opinions on the event. Some held Mark accountable, others sympathized with him, recognizing that his reactive measures stemmed from his own fears. This complicated dialogue highlighted how individuals often position themselves along spectrums of blame versus understanding based solely on proximity to either party. Meanwhile, Mark's family also faced scrutiny from peers regarding his judgment during that fateful night. Family members expressed concern over how easily someone could misinterpret common signals, how fear can warp perceptions into dangerous interpretations if not managed properly. "I just don't understand why he reacted like that," Mark's brother said during a tense discussion among friends over coffee one afternoon. His voice was tinged with worry for both his sibling and Frank, a duality of care weighed down by confusion. Community members frequently visited Mark at home, seeking insights into what led to his actions, but also providing him comfort amid brewing guilt. They wanted him to know he hadn't lost their trust entirely. Rather, they recognized that every person could falter when faced with overwhelming circumstances. In this shared space between families emerged discussions that illuminated critical aspects of human interaction. Topics like biases stemming from social status or job roles began surfacing amidst whispers shared in corners where people gathered together. Awareness grew about fostering better communication not only within the guards' duties, but across entire communities where prejudices could impose invisible barriers separating individuals who were essentially seeking connection. Amidst all this emerged stories highlighting hope. Tales where kindness rose above confusion, providing glimpses into healing potential, born through collaboration and conversation driven towards forgiveness rather than judgment alone. In an effort to foster understanding within each other's experiences, local leaders initiated workshops aimed at improving dialogue around assumptions made during conflict situations while cultivating mutual respect across various backgrounds forged through these shared moments. And opportunities positioned right before them. The reactions continued evolving. A testament that even amidst fear-based confrontation lies opportunities for connection, allowing communities like theirs an avenue toward reclaiming safety, rooted deeply in empathy. As people came together, reflecting warmth amongst challenging adversity, they could recognize that healing would demand patience, yet brought rewards greater than any division once envisioned prior. Leading into this newfound bond, strengthened against shadows lingering long past those initial mistakes. The events that unfolded that night at the school serve as a stark reminder of the critical importance of clear communication and understanding in our interactions. Frank and Mark, two individuals with their distinct backgrounds and life experiences, found themselves caught in a whirlwind of misinterpretation and fear that escalated far beyond what either of them intended. Their encounters showcased how misunderstandings can quickly spiral into dangerous situations, impacting not just those involved, but entire communities. First and foremost, this incident underscores the need for open dialogue. Too often, assumptions go unchallenged, leading to conclusions drawn in the heat of the moment. Had there been a space for Frank and Mark to express their thoughts and fears prior to that fateful night, perhaps they could have navigated their tensions more productively. Being able to communicate effectively could have fostered understanding rather than suspicion. An essential lesson for any community, especially where individuals work closely together, yet may be unaware of what plagues one another beneath the surface. Additionally, this confrontation emphasizes the necessity for training and education regarding conflict resolution, especially for individuals in positions of authority like security guards. Mark viewed his environment through a lens of heightened alertness derived from his past, which clouded his ability to see Frank as a colleague rather than a threat. By incorporating training focused on de-escalation tactics and awareness of biases into staff development programs, organizations can empower their employees to engage with emotions behind actions rather than react impulsively based on preconceived notions. These trainings could also encourage building empathy among team members, creating an appreciation for the complexities of each person's situation. Frank, who was simply trying to do his job to support his children, found himself viewed through a distorted lens shaped by Mark's fears. As communities invest in developing understanding through workshops or group discussions on implicit biases and common ground, they foster spaces where individuals can connect beyond roles defined by authority or labor, revealing shared struggles instead. In addition to structured training initiatives, it's vital that local leaders emphasize reconciliation and healing after such incidents occur. The ripple effects reached far beyond Frank and Mark. Not only did their families bear the brunt of distress, but colleagues extended support to one another while grappling with their feelings about security measures that seemed both necessary, yet frighteningly unpredictable. A focus on recovery following crises allows communities to reinforce safety while rebuilding trust broken during conflicts arising from misunderstandings. Throughout this journey toward healing lies an opportunity for heartfelt conversations among community members. Discussions shaping future engagements into more compassionate encounters grounded in other perspectives. Dialogue cultivates an atmosphere woven together with threads of supportive connection. Whether neighborly outreach or institutional adjustments, establishing firm practices, protecting all involved parties from losing sight of humanity amid chaotic fears. Reflecting on this incident encourages one to ponder. How swiftly could we act if kindness reigned over fear? How might relationships deepen should dialogues address uncertainties before imaginations conjure threats? Ultimately, this situation illustrates how vital it is for communities to learn, grow, and prioritize understanding as protective armor against divisive tensions. With empathy as our guide and honest reflections bridging gaps that once separated us, we become not just witnesses to conflicts, but active participants committed toward nurturing an environment strengthening our collective resolve against misunderstandings without resorting once again to fear. Let this incident stand as a beacon, illuminating paths towards deeper connections between individuals striving for peaceful coexistence. The key lies not only in safeguarding physical parameters, but also in nurturing those intrapersonal elements, coming together through honest communication, forming new blocks upon which better futures depend.